Okay, hello, hi. Um, we'll just let the people keep going with the snacks at the back, that's fine. This talk is called API Rationalization, the Journey of a Byline. This is me. I've worked at the FT for 20% of my life, but that's not really very long. I'm just super young. I'm a principal engineer in customer products. That is a Boris tail cactus. And if anybody wants to grow their own, please let me know and I'll send you some leaves that you can propagate. I don't have any sense of smell and I'm tired, but keeping my chin up. This talk is not API rationalization, a different approach, because I really phoned in the the brief for this talk, and that is on me. It's now propagated throughout all of the comms for this. So sorry if anyone was drawn in by that really compelling talk title. This is going to be way more interesting than that. It's annual review season. So if anybody wants to take a photo of this as feedback and send it to my manager, Anna Shipman, you can. That's fine. All for balance, there's this. Alice gave a talk at the engine room, which didn't make any sense. She leant very heavily on a faulty inductive reasoning, and I saw right through it. I just like giving you options, basically. Next thing is, I love you all. In this talk, we're going to look at a system, and that system was written by people. This is not a criticism of the decisions made by those people. They made sensible decisions based on the information they had available at the time. However, all systems tend towards entropy, and we're going to talk about this entropyed system. Entropy is not a real word. Thank you to Kara for pointing that out in the talk feedback. So we're going to inspect this system by looking at a very small unit of content, the byline, and what happens is it travels through our publishing system. And then I'm going to point out that the problems we encounter with the byline are encountered by all of our content, and then this talk will finish. So 3 stages. What is a byline? How do they work? How will they work? So this is a byline. We've got some examples here. And it's something of the format person in location, person in location, and person in other location, person in location, person and person in location, or my personal favorite, person, other thing by person. And this byline just shows some people who had a significant role in creating the article. Here are some examples of a byline by Sarah O'Connor in the app, the FT edit, and of course, ft.com. And there are all of our bylines. You can see there are some differences. Sarah O'Connor is hyperlinked in 2 of those, but in the edit is not because of restrictions placed on us by Apple around subscribing, which I won't get into. Another difference that I like but don't understand is in the app we say by Sarah O'Connor, but on ft.com we just say Sarah O'Connor. You figure it out. This is artisanally hand typed into Spark. Which I thought when I first found that out was very interesting because the technophile in me believes that you can use computers to make everything better. And like, I know journalists type for a living, but so do I, and I make loads of typos. So I did just think there must be, I mean, even making this GIF took me like 5 attempts to do it without making a typo. Anyway, so I thought, what the bloody hell is going on here, to put it in the words of our former editor? If anybody hasn't seen Scandal, Bringing Down Wirecard yet, it's full of shit like this. You really got to check it out. Anyway, Lionel wasn't available to explain bylines to me, but Malcolm Moore, who is the editor of The Edit and former technology correspondent, was, and he gave me the following information. So the first person in the byline is who wrote the story. The second/third/4th people have contributed significantly. Sometimes maybe they'll have given a tip that they couldn't then report on further, or maybe a significant quote that was used. And then there are some circumstances where the person who wrote the story doesn't get first credit, e.g. if the second person is way more important. So I believe this is probably an example of that. But again, Lionel wasn't available for comments, so I can't guarantee that. So yeah, maybe you could codify the rules of bylines into a system, but you would need to maintain a constantly changing version representation of who is the most important in editorial, although obviously it's ruler, but like, you know, underneath that, what's happening. So maybe it is just better to have a free text field. That's what I would like as a conclusion. As I mentioned, if the author is a staff writer, then they get a link to their stream pages. So stream pages just features all of their articles. So that's Sarah O'Connor. That's why it's bold there. That's a hyperlink. So in order to construct this byline, this specific one, we need two pieces of information, like the actual text of the byline, which has been typed by Sarah O'Connor in this case, and also the metadata about where her stream page is. So what the URL of that is. Okay, so onto one section down, people. Onto how do bylines work. So I'm going to go through this at a very high level, and then we're going to like slowly turn the screw to more detail. But at the very high level, we've got Malcolm Moore and noted FT reader Gwyneth Paltrow. And how does the byline from Malcolm Moore get to Gwyneth Paltrow's brilliant mind? So it goes through three systems. We've got Spark, or these are sort of collections of microservices in my mind. So we've got Spark, which is our CMS, that allows journalists to collaborate on stories and publish them. Then we've got content and metadata, which is a sort of constellation of APIs that make content and metadata available via APIs to consumers. And then in this case, customer products is really looking at ft.com and apps. So that's content like the app, the edit, and ft.com. So Malcolm Moore types Malcolm Moore into Spark. That goes to metadata. There's quite a complex mechanism by which content and metadata and ft.com and apps content move between those two systems, which I won't get into because I don't understand it. And then finally, we've got Gwyneth Paltrow reading this content on her various devices. So let's look at this bit first. This is Spark, and there are two things to pay attention to here. One is the byline. That's the byline field where Malcolm Moore is typing Malcolm Moore in London, although he would never type Malcolm Moore in London because the in London part is implied when no one else from anywhere else is in the byline. But anyway, and then also we've got tag me there, which is how he adds metadata. So it's not enough to just type Malcolm Moore. He needs to associate this content with an item in the knowledge graph, which has a UUID. And so that is how he is doing that part of the metadata. And the authors field will sort of auto-populate. You know, he starts typing Mal, and then we'll fill that in for him. So, like I said, Malcolm Moore, that's an arbitrary string, as we've seen. He could type it Malky Moore, Malcolm McMoore, Malky Malks. Only Malcolm Moore will be hyperlinked because it's it relates to the string Malcolm Moore in the knowledge graph, but there's no checking that Malcolm Moore is a real person in the byline. We just accept whatever is typed there. And then the more sort of rigorous part is the Malcolm Moore he adds via tag me, which does actually link to a real person, and that is Malcolm Moore's real UUID. So in Spark, this is him typing into the Spark front end, which sends the content, like all of the byline, but also all of the body content, everything he's written, the actual article, into the Spark API, which then gets stored in MongoDB. And then on publish, that gets sent to content and metadata. And then for tag me, it's very similar. It goes to the tag me API. And then that gets sent to a bit of content and metadata called the Platform for Annotations and Curation, which is PAC, which manages all of these annotations. Okay, that was easy, right? So we've covered that bit. And now we're going to go into this. So this is where I'm sort of out of my depth because with Spark and with ft.com and apps, I can read JavaScript. So I can read the source code and work out what's going on. This is harder. Luckily, I found this diagram. It's going to be a bit small for you to see at the back, but that's all the content and metadata. Not really. I mean, that is a real diagram, but actually Dimitar very helpfully pointed me at some slightly more easy to read diagrams. And from that, I kind of pulled out this, and Dimi really helpfully validated this, despite the fact that he's recently become a father again, I think, maybe again, I don't know. Anyway, so let's go through this bit. So we'll get up to like we'll do the first bit, which is how this stuff gets stored in content and metadata. Spark makes a post to the publish API that gets stored in the document store. It is much more complicated than this, but for the purposes of this talk, this is all we need to really know. And sends Malcolm Moore, the author, to the annotations publisher, and that goes to the annotations store. Sorry about the text. That's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? And then when we want that content in ft.com and apps, and again, it's a sort of complicated Rube Goldberg machine of getting content between these two systems, but it is available via the GET request to the internal content API for a UUID for some content. And in content metadata, the enrich content API takes that stuff in the document store, enriches it with the annotations for that thing, it makes it available to the internal content API, which makes it available to us. And the internal content API returns a document that has like the article body in it, the byline, lots of metadata, and all of the annotations. But the thing we actually care about is this. So for bylines, it's a field called byline, Sarah O'Connor, exactly whatever is typed into Spark, and then an annotation, Sarah O'Connor, which relates to like the knowledge graph and her as a object in the knowledge graph. Amazing. Just did that. Okay, now onto this bit. So this is what happens in ft.com and apps. At first glance, not that complicated. We are doing some strange, like there's a bit of a code smell with the chaining of APIs there to get to the edit, but diving in a bit more, we will find out that we are doing some weird and wonderful things here. So basically the big picture is that we take the article data and metadata from content and metadata, and we start augmenting it and transforming it so that it is ready to display in our front end. So by augmenting, I mean adding data in, because we don't have enough data from the internal content API to actually render a full article page. We have things like recommended stories that we need to know about, and there's quite a lot of logic around images that we need to do as well. And then we mark it all up in HTML to render, which of course is not the content metadata's area of responsibility. So let's look at rendering Sarah O'Connor. This is in next article. These are all HTML. So the edit is a native app, but we use web views to render content. The app uses web views, even if it's in a native wrapper. And obviously ft.com is a website, so that's HTML as well. So ostensibly, these could be using the same thing to render, but they're not quite. So here is this is ft.com. We've got Sarah O'Connor, a lovely text byline. We replace all of those spaces with placeholders or space holders, as I keep wanting to call them. We do a no-op on the byline here to replace that. If that was a straight quote, we would place it with a curly boy. There aren't any actual curly quotes in bylines anymore because of all of modern OSs will take your curly quote, take your hitting the quote key and work out what type of curly quote it should be. Then we wrap that in a load of HTML and classes to render it. And we work out who is a linkable person by iterating over the authors array that we get from content and metadata. And then we remove our space holders, and now that's that. And now we've got Sarah O'Connor in London. Things are different, same but different in the app. We're getting the same output here. We're just using array.map a bit more. So lovely text byline, break that up around anybody we find in the metadata array. Oops. And then rebuild the content as a JSX template, and then weirdly just add in finally the word by at the end, which again, who knows why we do that? Science has given up. It sounds, nobody can explain it. And then we get by Sarah O'Connor there. The edit, I'm not going to show you the rendering because it's literally just print the byline. So we're duplicating work here by constructing this byline and sort of parsing it and then trying to work out who's an author and whatnot. But like, I'm not a big advocate of, I think do not repeat yourself, dry. The dry concept in programming is useful, but also I'm not like a complete die-hard dry person. I do think sometimes repeating yourself is the quickest way to solve a problem, and you don't actually have that many issues with it. But there are also some strange data problems. And to illustrate this, I'm going to look at a single character. It's the curly quote. So curly quotes or smart quotes are, curly. Straight quotes are straight. And I've got some examples here. Straight quotes come from typewriters where you have a limited number of keys. So there's only a straight quote key rather than a curly quote for one direction and a curly quote for the other direction. In printing, before typewriters, with printing presses, you had more blocks to use, so you could do nicer typing. Modern OSs, although your keyboard only has one quote key, will work out what type of quote you want to have. And that's why all of our bylines, as artisanally hand typed in Spark, do have curly quotes. So Sarah O'Connor is one of 2 journalists at the FT, bad luck to the other one, who has a single quote in her name. Let's see what happens to that quote mark as it moves through our content pipeline. So in order to show you all what's happening here, I'm going to start by just drawing all of the systems that the data passes through as sort of fairly simple boxes. So we've got a box for Spark there, we've got one for content and metadata, and then we'll have quite a big box for ft.common apps because that's where most of the action is happening here. And inside ft.common apps, we can put some stuff in. So we've got Elasticsearch here, which is the document store for our articles that we get from content and metadata. We've got the app API, which is transforming data ready to be rendered by the web app. We've got the edit API, which is transforming data ready to be rendered by the edit app. And then we've got next article app, which is just a front end app that talks directly to Elasticsearch. The data moves through this system in the following arrows, and the main thing here to look at is that we've got some API chaining happening between the app and the edit APIs. So in Spark, Sarah O'Connor's name has 2 different representations. One is with a straight quote, that's from Tag Me, and one is with a curly quote, which is how the byline has been typed into that field that we saw earlier. And throughout this diagram, pink means curly quotes and blue means straight quotes. Content and metadata exposes this as one single response on the internal content API endpoint, and we've got the byline there, which is exactly the same as what's in Spark, and then we've got something called annotations pref name, which is the tag me data. Elasticsearch writes this data to itself, and we've got the curly quote there, as we always have. We've got annotations pref name, and then we've duplicated annotations pref name into a new field as well called author concepts pref name. The app API takes these 3 data points, byline, annotations pref name, and author concepts pref name, and then it does a string replace on the value in author concepts pref name to make that a curly quote, and then it duplicates that into a field called metadata. The web app receives all of this data because it's all available via the API endpoint, but it only uses metadata and byline to actually render Sarah O'Connor. The edit receives all of this, the edit API receives all of this data as well, chucks it all out except byline, and then passes that along to the edit app, which just renders the raw plain byline text with no modifications at all. Next article takes all of this data from Elasticsearch, byline, author concepts, and annotations, and only uses byline and annotations and does a string replace on both of the values in there to replace the curly quotes with, to replace the straight quotes with curly quotes, which of course is a no-op on the original byline because that has been a curly quote all along. Okay, so we got some duplication of work there. Same thing is rendered in every client. Kind of covered that. We've got duplication of data. So we've got annotations, author concepts, and then metadata. We've got poor separation of concerns as well, because the next article is both doing that kind of transformation on the data, making that curly a straight quote, a curly quote, but it's also rendering it. Whereas the app, for example, there's the API gets all of that data ready, and then the app simply renders it. This is obviously not really a very big deal. There are only 2 authors that actually have this problem, but these kinds of problems are bad because they make it really hard to debug content issues, as they could be occurring in several places because several places have the same responsibilities. They make it really hard to extend the system because it's confusing to think about and hard to work out where you would logically put new features. And they make new features slow to add, as the updates are often required in several places. We also, this is a bit of a sidebar because it's not actually about articles, but we have problems like this. Straight quote appearing there for Sarah O'Connor's link to her Add to My FT page, but a curly quote in her byline. Apologies to anyone with a clown phobia. So curly quotes are like, you know, a single character is like the minimum viable problem demonstration. But we have like, this is sort of endemic, and also just a PSA, if you're going to use the tip of the iceberg metaphor, please make sure that your iceberg is rendered correctly and floating as an iceberg really would. You can use iceberger to work that out. So I think I've convinced you that there is a problem. And now we're going to talk about how will they work. So I want to introduce you to the API rationalization team. We've got Cara. She's a tech lead. We've got Maggie, who, when I said, do you want to join this team, to everybody, Maggie was like the first person who was like, yes. So thanks, Maggie. We've got Nick, who came over from Enterprise and is been slinging some mad code. We've got Arjun, who was in internal products and has come over. And then we've got Glyn, who's having a little rest from storytelling for a bit. And the brief was, let's take this problem that we have, which is really hard. I know I've made it seem simple by being so great at explaining everything, but it's really complicated. And there's lots of other considerations for this as well, like caching and resilience and what happens when editorial publish something libelous and we need to really quickly change it. Hi, John Holton. So there's lots of stuff here that I haven't gone into, but so I wanted a team that could like take this problem, hit it like a freight train, break it apart and reconstruct it in 6 months, which is what they've done. So instead of this, which I've unhelpfully scribbled all over, but you can kind of remember it, they have built 4 things. So there's a content pipeline API, which is a graph, an Apollo GraphQL server, which accepts content queries from all of our clients and will return JSON containing only the data the clients need to render their pages. We've got the CP content pipeline UI, which is a package that's going to help with that rendering step so that we don't need to have multiple different ways to render the same thing in different clients. We've got the CP content pipeline API, which is going to help all of our clients make those GraphQL queries because it can be a little challenging. And finally, we've got the CP content pipeline schema, which is going to define all of the types we're using to add a bit of rigor. So instead of this, we're going to have something probably that looks like that. We're still working through a sort of minimum viable end-to-end here by getting this API working in the edit and the app, but it is available and behind a flag on ft.com article pages already. We're going to tidy up those byline quotes inside the content pipeline API, and we're going to give people the UI library to render a byline without having to like work out how to do it from scratch. As some bonus content, we're also working across content and metadata and Spark and customer products to expose article data in an abstract syntax tree, which will make it easier to make these kind of transformations and data enhancements. So you can see this all for yourself. You can have a mess about with our implementation by visiting ft.com/content. That's where the Apollo GraphQL server is currently serving. And you can turn on the content pipeline next article flag in Toggler to see articles currently rendered through this new pipeline. You can come and read our blog on Confluence. We've got some Taylor Swift jokes. Taylor Swift is a American recording artist for any Generation X in the room. She's very popular with the youngs. You can come and join us for office hours. This is an office hours from a while ago, but my only screenshot. Sorry about all my tabs as well. And you can come and hang out in CP API rationalization. And if you say anything self-deprecating, we will make you put £1 in any imaginary jar, which is what's happening to Jen here. As foretold, this talk is now ending. So some takeaways. Bylines are governed by an arcane and opaque set of editorial rules that are resistant to codifying. Our bylines and accompanying metadata travel through many systems to reach our readers. And in ft.com and apps, we are rebuilding our bit of the pipeline to make it easier to run and extend. I just want to say thank you to all of the people who had a significant contribution to this talk. First of all, there's me. Thank you to me for believing in me. But also Rowan, Cara, Nick, Arjun, Ash, Chi, the other Rowan, who is equally as important as the first Rowan, but later in Charlotte and Malcolm, all in London, Maggie in Northern Ireland, Dimitar in Sofia, and Nayana, wherever you are. She's not dead, she's just left the FD. All right, thank you very much.